It's also important to point out, however, that there's much to be concerned about as well. I ran into, the committee may find this interesting, a startling statistic the other day that my team brought me. And that is, if you look at where we stand against other states, as I said, we're about the top of the nation. We are, however, the 47th worst state out of 50 when it comes to the gap between our educationally disadvantaged children and our educationally non-disadvantaged children. Let me say that again. The gap between our ED and our non-ED children is higher than in every state but 3 in this country. There are 200 schools in this state where I think we should all be taken aback by the level of performance. We can glory in the fact there are thousands of schools that are successful, but there are hundreds of schools in this state where I think we need to be deeply, deeply concerned. By the 11th grade, only 54% of economically disadvantaged students in New Jersey are proficient or better in math, 30% in science. By way of comparison, the numbers for non-ED kids are 80% for math and approaching 70% in science. In language arts, there is a 30-point achievement gap between rich and poor. In 3rd grade language arts, roughly 60% of African American students and 56% of Hispanic students failed to meet basic proficiency standards last year. In Newark, 4 out of 10 African American middle school students are proficient in language arts, and only 3 in 10 are proficient in math. It's actually worse in Camden, where there's one school where only 1 out of every 10 students is proficient in math. We can go on and on and on, but one statistic really jumps out at me. In Newark, 22% of the children who start the 9th grade in Newark graduate 4 years later having passed the high school proficiency assessment. 22%. And just to give you a sense of the meaning of that, 98% of the children who come out of Newark, whether or not they pass the HESPA, need a year of remediation before they can actually enter into the main program at a community or junior college. Now, we can have a lot of conversations about the failure or the inadequacy of tests. We can talk about lots of issues, and they're all true. We can have a spirited conversation about that. These are not numbers. As elected officials, as administrators, this is a moral outrage when we are talking about what is happening to children in our state that we are responsible for. When you don't graduate from high school in this state, it means a great deal in terms of life outcomes. Your earning potential, your mortality, your morbidity, your likelihood of contact with the judicial system. We are presiding over a tremendous human tragedy in this state, and we all need to be honest about it and to address it with every ounce of energy and creativity that we have. And incidentally, there is a broader issue when it comes to standards in this state. We take great comfort in the fact that we are among the highest graduation rate in the state. In fact, our exit examinations for high school is geared more to an 8th grade level than a 12th grade level. Students are given 3 opportunities to pass it, and it takes less than 50% right to graduate in this state. So we need to make sure that as we move forward, we are paying attention not only to who is not meeting standards, but are our standards high enough for this state to be competitive in the 21st century. Now, these concerns occur in the context of a tremendous financial commitment that collectively we have made toward education in this state. I think it's worth noting that in the last audited fiscal year, the state spent $25 billion were spent by schools in the state. Our per pupil spending is the highest in the nation at $17,600 per student. We have among the very highest teacher salaries in the United States that have increased dramatically over the last several years. During that same period, spending in the 31, we now call them appropriately, the 31 former Abbott districts doubled as a percentage of state budget. It's now 15%, 15.5% of all spending in all departments. 6 of every 10 pre-K to 12 state dollars goes to the 31 former habits. That's a 61% increase since 1985, and that's despite a significant decline in population. So the investment that this state is making, and I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to talk about that at some length, certainly by any comparative standard, is deep and profound and has grown dramatically over the course of the last several years. And it is certainly jarring, if nothing else, to serious policymakers that despite that investment, the kind of statistics I was indicating before about the achievement gap it basically have not improved in a material way in those years. There are things we could be doing, many of which are contained in the reform agenda that the governor has put forward, but the first and most important thing is we need to put all political theater to one side and be honest about what we're dealing with. We need to stop talking about issues unless we are asking ourselves first and foremost, are we doing everything in our power to improve the lives of these children who are falling further and further behind? There are a lot of interests implicated in a system that spends $25 billion a year. There are the interests of educators, there are the interests of districts, there are the interests of labor, there are the interests of those who do business with school districts. All of these are legitimate interests, but sometimes they conflict with what is in the best interest of children. And if we collectively put our arms together and said, what we are going to do is focus